Myst, the Book of Atrus, continues as read by the bathroom reader. I am covering for the plurality report, who exclaims that he doesn't need no stinking audiobook recordings. Chapter 20. Impossible. Atrus stepped out of the air into a huge conical bowl of darkness, and in the middle of that bowl, at the precise center of the massive, mile-wide hole that pierced it, a powerful column of water, as broad as a river, thundered straight up into the darkness until it was lost from sight, a great spike of brilliant, crystalline light, glowing like a fierce flame at its center where it emerged from the glowing depths. Atrus stared, dumbstruck. A group of large, firefly-like insects glided past, their translucent bodies glowing golden red, their movements more like the movements of fish than the darting flight of insects. Atrus looked down, meaning to brush one away, as he was shocked to see it pass right through his legs, reforming like a soap bubble on the other side. Other creatures, their forms no less fantastic, sporting long, sparkling quills and fans, extravagant crests or tails like golden chains, fluttered and weaved across that midnight landscape, their forms merging and reforming, constantly in movement, constantly, it seemed, in transformation. "It must be a dream, don't you think?" Catherine said, stepping up alongside him. There was the scent of lemon in the air, the faintest trace of pine and cinnamon. Atrus nodded absently, his eyes following the course of one of the fireflies, drawn to it, seeing how it seemed to merge and then detach itself from a rocky crag nearby, traces of its bright color left behind in the sparkling black surface of the rock, which pulsed momentarily, then was still again. Not that the rock was like real rock. It had a glassy look to it, as if it were made of gelatin, yet it had the warm, textured feel of wood. Most surprising of all, it smelled. Atrus sniffed, then shook his head, amazed, of roses and camphor. Everywhere he looked, forms met and merged. The barriers that normally existed between things dissolved away here, as in a dream. He shivered, then looked up, pointing out toward the great chute of water that cascaded endlessly into the night sky. "Where does it go?" She laughed, the softest, gentlest laugh he had ever heard. "Did you ever wonder what it would be like to go swimming out among the stars?" Swimming? For a moment he thought of Anna and the cleft, that evening after the desert rain. "Yes," she said wistfully, "if it is my dream, we could fall into the night and be cradled by stars and still return to the place where we began." Atrus stared at her, wondering what she meant. Sometimes she was like her book, beautiful and poetic, yes, and incomprehensible too. "I'm not very lucky with water," he said, making her laugh. "But this," he turned, raising his arms to indicate the age she had made, "I can't understand it." He looked to her, shaking his head in amazement. "I just can't see how it works." He looked about him, disconcerted by the way a bright blue, snake-like creature split in two as it brushed against his arm, then split again and again until there was a whole school of tiny snakes swimming with identical motions in a tight formation. "Did you imagine all of this?" "Most of it," she answered, walking past him, then stooping to pluck something from the ground close by. "Some of it I can't remember writing. It's almost like I stop thinking and just write." She turned back, offering something to him. It was a flower, but not just a flower. As he went to take it from her, it seemed to flow toward his hand and rub against him, like a kitten brushing against its owner's legs. Atrus moved back. "What is it?" she asked. I don't know," he smiled. "It's just strange, that's all." Catherine bent down and put the flower down carefully, then looked at him and smiled. "There's nothing here that's harmful. You're safe here, Atrus. I promise you." Maybe so, but he still felt ill at ease. Nothing here behaved as if it ought to behave. Wherever he looked, the rules of normality were broken. This was an age where the laws had been stood on their head. By rights, it ought not to exist, and yet it did. So what did that mean? Was it as Catherine had said? Did some other set of laws not discovered by the Dani, prevail here? Or was this simply an anomaly? Catherine straightened up, then put her hand out to him. "Come, let me show you something." He walked down the slope with her until he stood only a few yards from the edge. Beyond it there was nothing but the glow far below them, and the water spewing up out of the center of that brightness. "Here," she said, handing him something small, smooth, and flat. Atrus looked at it. It was a polished piece of stone, small enough to fit in his hand. "Well," she said, "have you never skimmed a stone before?" He looked to her, then swung his arm back and cast the stone across the darkness, imagining he was skimming it across the surface of a pond. The stone skimmed rapidly across the vacant air, and then, as if it had suddenly hit a rock, soared in a steep curve upward, finally disappearing into that mighty rush of water. Atrus stared, open-mouthed, as he lost it in that mighty torrent, then turned to find that Catherine was laughing softly. "Your face!" Atrus snapped his mouth shut, then looked back. He found that he wanted to do it again, to see the stone skim across the emptiness, then soar. "Where does it go?" "Come," she said, taking his hand again. "I'll show you." The tunnel through which they walked was small, just big enough for them to walk upright, and perfectly round, like a wormhole through a giant apple, the passage unevenly lit by some property within the rock itself. It led down, continually curving until it seemed as though they must be walking on the ceiling. And then they came out into brilliant daylight, out into a landscape as amazing as the one they had left at the far end of the tunnel. Atrus winced, his eyes pained by the sudden light, and pulled his glasses on, then straightened, looking out. Just as the dark side had been strange, so this, the bright side of Catherine's nature, as he saw it, was wonderful. They stood at the top of a great slope, a large rocky hill in the midst of an ocean, one of several set in a rough circle, each hill carpeted with bright, gorgeously scented flowers over which 1,000,000 butterflies danced and fluttered. And at the very center of that circle of rock-like hills, a great ring-shaped waterfall rushed inward at an angle toward a single central point far below. Directly over that huge vortex, flickering in and out of visibility, were twisting vertical ribbons of fast-moving cloud that appeared high up in the air, then vanished quickly into the mouth of that great circular falls. With a shock of recognition, Atrus understood. "We're on the other side. It's the source of the great torrent. It falls through." And even as he said it, his mouth fell open with wonder. But how? What physical mechanism was involved? For he knew, with a sudden absolute certainty, that if this existed, then there was a physical reason why it existed. This did not break the Dani laws. It merely twisted them, pushing them to their limits. He looked to Catherine, a sudden admiration in his eyes. "This is beautiful. I never guessed." She took his hand. "There's more. Would you like to see?" "Yes." "Out there," she said, directing his eyes toward the horizon. Atrus stared. Huge thunderclouds massed at the horizon, rising up into the sky like steam from a boiling pot. Incredible thunderstorms, their noise muted by distance, filled the air out there, the whole of the horizon, as far as he could see to left and right, filled with flickering lightning. It completely surrounds the Taurus, he realized, turning, looking back at the great hole in the ocean, remembering the great jet of water on the far side of that massive hole. There seemed to be two separate forces at work here, one a jet stream force and the other a ring force to which the water was attracted. Atrus blinked, then looked to Catherine. "You put most of the mass of the Taurus at its outer edge, didn't you?" She simply smiled at him. "So the gravity—" Atrus paused, his right fist clenched intently, frown lines etched deep in his brow. "That circle of gravity forces the water through the central hole. Then some other force sucks it up into the sky, where it fans out, still captured by the gravitational field of the Taurus, and falls down the outer edges of that field. Right?" She simply smiled at him. "And as it slowly falls, it forms clouds, and the clouds cause the storms, and—" It was impressive. In fact, now that he partly understood it, it was even more impressive than he'd first thought. He turned, standing looking about him, then stopped dead. Just across from him was a patch of flowers, nestled in among the lush grass. He walked across, climbing the slope, until he stood among them. Flowers. Blue flowers. Thousands of tiny, delicate blue flowers with tiny, star-like petals and velvet dark stamen. Moved by the sight, he stooped and plucked one, holding it to his nose, then looked to her. "How did you know?" "Know?" Catherine's brow wrinkled in puzzlement. "Know what?" "I thought... no, it doesn't matter." Then, changing the subject, "What are you to my father?" She looked down. "I am his servant, one of his guild members." He looked at her, knowing there was more, but afraid to ask. After a moment, she spoke again. "I am to be married to him." "Married?" She nodded, unable to look at him. Atrus sat heavily, the flowers all around him. He closed his fingers, squeezing the tiny delicate bloom, then let it fall. His head hung now, and his eyes seemed desolate. "He has commanded me," she said, stepping closer. 30 days, Gen said. "There is to be a great ceremony on Riven, age 5. He looked up, a bitter disappointment in his eyes. She met his eyes clearly. "I'd rather die." Slowly, very slowly, understanding of what she'd said came to his face. Then you must help me, Atrus. We have 30 days. 30 days to change things." "And if we can't?" Catherine turned her head, looking about her at the age she had written, then looked back at Atrus, her green eyes burning with such an intensity that he felt transfixed, frozen, utterly overwhelmed by this strange woman and the odd powers she possessed. And as she held his gaze, she reached out for his hand, clenching it tightly in her own, and spoke, her voice filling him with a sudden, almost impulsive confidence. "We can do wonders, you and I. Wonders." Chapter 21. As the sun slowly set, Atrus stood on the top of the tiny plateau, his glasses pulled down tightly over his eyes, his journal open in his hand, looking out across the age he had written. Below him lay a cold, dark sea, its surface smooth like oil, or like a mirror blackened by age, its sterile waters filling the great bowl that lay between the blood-red sandstone cliffs. On the shores of that great sea, the land was bare and empty, more desolate even than the desert he had known as a child. Titanic sandstone escarpments, carved by the action of wind and sun, stretched to the horizon on every side, their stark blood-red shapes interspersed with jagged, night-black chasms. He had written in the bare minimum this time, enough to conduct his experiment and no more, enough to see whether his theories about the flaws in the Age 5 book were true or not. He had built 10 such ages in the past few weeks, 2 for each experiment. In this and one other he was testing whether the changes he sought to make in the orbital system of Age 5 would have the desired effects, while in others he was experimenting with the structure of the tectonic plates beneath the planet's crust, the type and strength of the oceanic currents, fluctuations in gravitational fields, and the composition of the crust itself. What he had done, here and elsewhere, was to recreate the same underlying structures that he had found in the Age 5 book, only incorporating a specific minor alterations, additions mainly, to the way the thing was phrased. If that new phrasing was correct, then this age was now stable, and if this was stable, then so would Age 5 be, once he had written the changes into the book. Looking about him, he jotted down his observations, then, closing the journal, slipped it into his knapsack. Thus far, his tests had proved one thing conclusively. Age 5 was doomed. It would degenerate and be destroyed within a generation unless he made these vital, telling changes to the book. Lifting his glasses, he blinked, then rubbed at his eyes. He was tired, more tired than he'd been in years, yet he could not let up now. It was only 10 days until the ceremony, and everything had to be ready for that time. Pulling his glasses back down, Atrus waited. The moon would be rising soon, and then he'd know. If he was right, Gen had placed Age 5's single moon well inside the synchronous orbital distance from the planet. This had the effect of increasing the planet's tides dramatically and, ultimately, would result in the moon being dragged into ever lower orbits until it would finally smash into the planet's surface. That final catastrophe would take many lifetimes, but long before that happened, the great tides generated by the moon's ever closer orbit would destroy the island, smashing it into the surrounding sea. He needed to push Age 5's moon back into a stable synchronous orbit, one where its rotation rate would be equivalent to the planet's. What complicated the task was that he would have to achieve this in a manner that could not be directly observed. As the light dimmed, Atrus pulled his cloak tighter about him. The air here was thin and cold, and it would be good to get back to Donnie, if only for some sleep. He waited, watching as the sun winked, then vanished beneath the edge of the horizon. Atrus turned and, pulling up his glasses, looked for the moon. He saw it at once, directly behind him in the sky, low down, the silver-blue orb huge and ominous. Wrong, he thought, chilled by the sight. It's much too close. The tremors began at once, the tiny plateau gently vibrating as if some machine had started up in the rock beneath his feet. The sea was stifled now, like a sheet of black, beaten metal. Atrus stared up at the moon. What had gone wrong? Had he written in a contradiction of some kind? Or were the changes he'd made simply the wrong ones? Or, in his tiredness, had he mixed up the two books? Was he in the wrong age, the age where he had exaggerated the moon's deteriorating orbit? The trembling grew, became a steady shaking. There was a groaning now from deep within the earth, sharp cracks, the sound of rocks falling, splashing into the sea below, while the sea itself seemed to be boiling, as if in a great cauldron. In the distance the land was glowing, not with the silver blue of moonlight, but a fiery orange-red. A cold wind gusted across the plateau. Frowning, Atrus stepped over to the edge and, lowering his glasses, increased their magnification. That distant glow was the molten glow of magma spewing out from deep within the fiery mantle. Out there, beneath that low and massive moon, the planet's crust was tearing itself apart. The noise all about him was deafening now, and the shaking was so bad that he found it hard to even stand without bracing himself. It was time to link back. Atrus half-turned, lowering his right shoulder, meaning to slip the knapsack from his back and take the linking book from inside, but as he did so, the ground lurched violently. Knocked from his feet, Atrus reached out blindly, grabbing a nearby outcrop, but though it stopped him sliding, it was no good, for the whole plateau was slowly tipping over, sliding inch by inch toward the sea below. What's more, the knapsack was trapped beneath him, and when he tried to lift himself to free it, he lost his grip and began to tumble down the tilted face of the plateau. For a moment his fingers scrabbled at the surface of the rock, and then abruptly he was falling through the air. "No!" His cry was cut short as he hit the cold, dark surface of the sea. For a moment he panicked, not knowing which way he faced, the water in turmoil all about him, and then his head breached the surface and he gasped for air. Water splashed his face constantly now, filling his mouth and nose. He struggled not to swallow any, struggled to bring his knapsack around so he could get the book. And then he saw it. Directly ahead of him, its thundering crest lit almost demonically by the obscenely huge moon that seemed to ride on its back, was the wave, a huge black wave that towered over the surrounding pinnacles of rock, smashing and splintering them as if they were nothing. And as it came on the water all about Atrus grew still and smooth, an eerie silence falling, a silence that contrasted with all the great roar of the oncoming mountain of water. For a moment Atrus forgot. For a moment he simply stared at the sight. Then, abruptly, he snapped into action, and, scrabbling at the sack, his fingers numb from the coldness of the water, he took the linking book out and flicked it open. Home! And even as Atrus placed his hand upon the page, the moon blinked out, and the whole of the sea in which he rested seemed to lift up to join that great black wall of water, the noise so loud it made his whole skull tremble, as if at any moment it would shatter. Coming to his senses, Atrus found himself lying in an exhausted heap on the cold floor of the chamber, back on Donnie, a puddle of water from his drenched clothes forming beneath his body. The air was cool, and the silence, after that hideous destructive roar, was the most welcome sound he'd ever heard. He let out a long breath, remembering that final moment as the wave towered over him, lifting him up into its sightless maw as if to devour him, then sat up. Tearing off his glasses, he turned toward his desk. Catherine was sitting there in his chair, unaware of his return, her whole attention focused on the book she was reading. "Catherine?" She looked up, closing the book and setting it aside. Then, taking in the sight of him, she stood quickly and came around the desk. "Atrus, are you all right?" He stood, fending her off. "I'm okay. Just a little trouble with the moon." "The moon?" He waved her query aside, then, softly, "Why are you here? I thought we said it would be best if you stayed on Riven." "I know, but—" She stopped, then went over to the desk and turned the book around to face her. "I don't want to go back." "But you must. You can't stay here." "I've been working on something," she said, as if she hadn't heard him. "I wanted to surprise you." Catherine turned and handed him the book. Atrus stared at her, then, when she said no more, took the book over to the desk, sat and opened it. For a while he was silent, the sound of a turning page the only noise in that great chamber. Then, with a little shake of his head, he looked up. "What is this?" She stepped up next to him, looking down at the open pages. "I've written us an age, somewhere we can go. I've named it Myst." "But this is so different from your other age." "You don't like it?" "No, it's what I would have done had I the time. You..." He laughed and covered her hand with his own. "I think you are astonishing." "I've been studying." Atrus looked at it again, astounded by the sudden restraint in the writing, the deep understanding of Dawny principles that surpassed even his own. He was silent for a long time. "There are one or two final touches," she said, breaking that silence. "But when they're done—" "You can take me there?" Catherine smiled. "Of course. Now out of my way. I've work to do." Atrus sat back after Catherine had gone. Whatever he felt for Catherine, whatever she might feel for him, this was far more important. If his father was allowed to triumph on age 5, then he would triumph everywhere, for there was no end to Gen's ambitions. Having seen what Catherine had, through chance or design, created in her 2 ages, he knew now it was possible that Gen might yet achieve his dream of resurrecting the Dawny Empire, or at least a shadow of it, of creating countless slave worlds with himself as lord, the fate of millions subject to his will. There was but one solution, to trap Gen on age 5 and destroy all of the linking books that led out of that age. But to do so, he would have to take the risk that he too might be trapped there. And now that Catherine had created Myst Island for them, as a sanctuary away from Gen, the thought of failure seemed suddenly quite hideous. Of course, they would have to write another separate age, a simple uninhabited world they might reach from Myst, one where fruit and herbs were plentiful, so they would be provided for her new age was curiously lacking in such things. Thinking of what he had read of Catherine's latest book, he wondered briefly if she had really written it, or whether, like his father, she had copied elements of it. It was so different, after all, from her other world. Or was that fair? After all, if she had been studying... He shook his head, trying to clear it, to keep focused on what he had to do. His main priority was still to stabilize the island. Once that was done, he would need to find where Gen kept his linking book, for unless he knew that, he could not trap him. He would have to go there and look, to search all the likely places until he found it. And the most likely place was the cave behind the temple. Right now, however, there were other things to do. Yawning, Atrus took the age 5 notebook from his pocket, then, pulling his journal toward him, turned it to the page on which he had written out the changes he was to make to the age 5 book, and began to write. "Atrus! Atrus!" He woke, wondering what on earth was happening. Catherine was standing over him, shaking him by the shoulders, calling his name time and time again. "Atrus, come on, wake up, you have to listen to me." He sat up, groggy, barely able to open his eyes. "Oh, what?" "It's Gen. He's moved the date forward." "The date?" Atrus was suddenly wide awake. "Moved it to when?" 3 days. We've got only 3 days." He groaned. Then it was impossible. There were still more tests to be made before the 5th age could be put right, and then there was the matter of Gen's linking book. Unless he could get a hold of that. "Catherine, you know where Gen keeps his linking book?" She nodded. "Could you take me back to Riven and show me where?" Again she hesitated, then, "What are you going to do?" "Does my father expect to see you again before the wedding ceremony?" Catherine shook her head. "Good." He looked about him at the cluttered desk. "Then we'll take all of this to Myst, all but the Myst and age 5 books. Then I want you to stay there, Catherine. I want you to keep away from both Donnie and Riven." "But you'll need help." Atrus looked at her sternly. "The biggest help to me will be to know that you're safe." "But what are you going to do?" He stood up, then came around the desk, taking her arms gently in his hands. "Do you trust me, Catherine?" She smiled, then nodded. "Then wait for me. As soon as I've dealt with my father, I'll come and join you on Myst Island." There was a slight flicker in her expression, as if for a moment she was going to disagree, then she nodded. "Good. Then let's get back to Riven. It's time you showed me where my father keeps his linking book."